Toilet paper. It's amazing just how much attention can be drawn towards such a basic item. Nonetheless, it became one of early 2020's most sought after things, only rivaled by face masks, Animal Crossing, and hiring someone to screen Elon Musk's tweets before he posts them. This recent craze for toilet paper though, it's actually quite complex and multifaceted. There have been many attempts all over the web to explain it, but none as far as I've seen have been able to cover how a magnitude of factors all played into this single event, at least all in one place. And with this video, I hope to do just that. So let's jump into it. We got a lot of ground to cover. Let's start off with a brief preface. Back in early February 2020, panic over a shortage of toilet paper would spread around the world, arguably faster than the accompanying pandemic. By mid-March, just about any society that uses toilet paper would be impacted by people overcome with fear of not having any, in some cases making outlandish and even selfish purchases. Though the memes have been absolutely wonderful. As of August 2020, most stores would finally remove limits on how much toilet paper you can purchase. What is going on? Well, first, we need to understand the toilet paper supply chain. The trouble with toilet paper is it's a very weird product. It's very cheap, takes up a lot of space, and there are notably two kinds: consumer toilet paper and commercial toilet paper. Consumer toilet paper you get at the store. It comes in small bundles, typically fluffier and often made with new trees. Great for houses. Commercial toilet paper, on the other hand, is normally sold in bulk on large pallets. Rolls are typically larger with thinner paper and commonly made with recycled fibers. Not recycled toilet paper though, thank goodness. Any organization with a lot of bathrooms, like schools or offices, they often buy this. These are separate markets for separate products, often made at different mills with modified equipment. Some manufacturers just focus on one market altogether. And it's worth addressing, toilet paper and face masks do not necessarily tap into the same pool of raw resources, as had to be addressed by the Taiwanese government and the Japanese Household Paper Product Industry Association when the panic hit them. Now, toilet paper manufacturers are extremely efficient due to tight profit margins. Mills are often already working at near max capacity to sell a lot with the least amount of overhead to make the most amount of money. So they are often running at 24 hours a day as it is. And due to toilet paper's low price and large volume, companies don't often store a lot of it around at one time. So with that said, when something messes with the market, like you staying home from work, school, or public outings, you will use the restroom more at home, putting a greater demand on one side of the market, consumer toilet paper. Even if humanity as a whole is using the same amount of toilet paper on average. Georgia Pacific, a consumer toilet paper manufacturer, estimates that the average household will use 40% more consumer toilet paper while stuck at home all day. And the trouble is, you can't easily supplement that with now unused commercial toilet paper, for it's not the same exact product. So mills that make consumer toilet paper have to make up the difference, but that is not always easy, especially if you're being overwhelmed. 7th generation CEO Joey Bergstein discussed how their supply chains try to have a 30% buffer to deal with the surge in demand. But by March 8th, he discussed how the demand for his company's consumer toilet paper went up by 600 to 750%. NC Solutions, a data consulting firm, tracked an 850% increase in online and in-store purchases of toilet paper from March 11th to 12th. That is a lot of poo paper. The market would have been strained, panic buying or not, but there was panic buying, and it made the situation far worse. So this raises the question, why was there a global panic to buy specifically toilet paper during a pandemic that was a respiratory illness? To understand this, we need to briefly look at the reasoning behind the populations that were first panic buying this stuff. People buying items in bulk was inevitable during a time like this, and there was always going to be an increase in toilet paper sales. People wanted to have enough supplies to extend the amount of time before they had to go back out in public and restock. But it's the idea that a product might soon not be available at all that conditioned the first instances of large-scale panic buying. Toilet paper would be caught up into this starting around February 3rd, only to go on to become an unstoppable global panic arguably around February 28th. And that's potentially because it's such a commonly used item around the world. It's great for headlines because most people can relate to needing it. Well, except for some people in parts of the Middle East. They got lotas, big brain. The major players responsible for the 2020 toilet paper fiasco are the island communities of Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, and Hawaii. All four being widely different from each other, all but in at least one important way. They are heavily dependent on imports. And this is at the center of it all. Their fears around imports would be oversimplified and adopted by people around the world as a supposed global or at least nationwide shortage, when really it was the logistical complications of island life shaped by complex political and historical events, parts of which would be spread around through social media and by the news. There's only one major area that would have widespread panic buying occur in the same time frame, but toilet paper was almost never brought up in news coverage, at least at first internationally. The not an island, Lombardy, northern Italy. So with that, we need to take a deeper look at the context and history of these places to get a better understanding of how one thing led to another. East Asia has had to deal with pandemics before. There was notably the 1956, 1968, and 2002 pandemics that would start in China, only to later spread to the whole region, hitting Hong Kong and Singapore notably quite hard. Singapore would be the first to publicly identify the 1956 flu. It was called the Asian flu. Hong Kong would be the first to identify the 1968 flu, which was later named the Hong Kong flu, which I imagine they didn't appreciate too much. Talk about shooting the messenger. Both pandemics would leave a mark on the local cultures, but not as hard as the 2002 pandemic. In November of 2002, SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, a form of coronavirus itself, would show up in China's Yunnan province, and would later spread to Hong Kong's neighboring Guangdong province that same month, among others. Chinese law establishes that new infectious diseases are classified as a state secret until addressed, often publicly, by the Chinese Ministry of Health, or an organization closely affiliated with them, a policy which was largely shaped by the last few major outbreaks. All of this censorship empowers a culture of guerrilla media in China, where people seek and share rumors to fill in information vacuums or distrust of the news, as the public relies on itself for info. Claims of insider information or first-hand information, true, distorted, or fake, can often snowball, becoming widely popular. This would lead to a massive spike in text messages on February 8, 2003. People panicked about a widespread mysterious illness to each other despite CCP denials, causing a wave of panic buying. The following day, experts from China's CDC and Ministry of Health went to Guangdong. On the 10th, local Guangdong and Hong Kong news reported an atypical pneumonia, causing another wave of panic buying, this time with a focus on pharmacies on the mainland. It would be on the 11th that officials had a press conference acknowledging the disease, saying everything was under control, this right after having state-imposed information blackouts for the mainland. Hong Kong, which had a mostly free press by the way, officially learned of the disease around the same time the rest of the world did. The secrecy did not sit well with many people in Hong Kong. And soon, Hong Kong and Singapore would forever be changed by the pandemic after an incident at a Hong Kong hotel where residents from both communities were infected, among others. Close to half of reported deaths and 1/4 of reported cases of SARS in China happened in Hong Kong alone, according to CCP and WHO records, take that for what you will. And tragically, the disease would spread to many unsuspecting hospital workers, which is very important to make note of for this video. The cases brought to Singapore would cause an outbreak there too, reaching code orange, the second highest code alert for the city nation. As for panic buying in Hong Kong, there was nothing too out of the ordinary until, yes, on April 1st, a 14-year-old boy made a fake online article proclaiming that Hong Kong is an infected port, indicating that the island was soon going to be cut off from imports. This spread like wildfire as it was passed on by email and word of mouth. Due to this claim, it started a massive buying frenzy, and people during the middle of the pandemic rushed to stores and started clearing them out. They went for items listed in the rumor: ramen noodles, cooking oil, chili paste, canned soups, rice, and toilet paper. The hoax tapped into insecurities around imports for the island city, made all the more believable given how hard Hong Kong was being hit by SARS. It just had to seem plausible to enough people to get them worrying and shaping their behavior. A panic would set in, clearing out stores, making it hard for them to resupply, completely shocking other people, making them panic too. Some people did in fact face a portion of that quarantine with a shortage of resources, all because of that event. Now with that, let's move ahead to the 2019 and 2020 pandemic. A respiratory illness would show up in China's Hubei province roughly around November 2019. China controversially would only publicly acknowledge it on the last day of December as it was spreading rapidly. This time when Hong Kong learned about it, it would happen in the middle of massive protests. Hong Kong is, or maybe now was, a semi-autonomous Chinese city that was once part of the British Empire. It would be returned to China in 1997, and since then it's been quite a bumpy ride as many of their promised privileges have been rolled back. Numerous Hong Kong residents started protesting an extradition bill back in March 2019 in fear that mainland China would abuse it, though it's grown into a much bigger issue. All of this has pinned many Hong Kong citizens not only against the mainland Chinese government, but also their local city government containing many CCP sympathizers. Confidence and trust in both governments, Beijing and Hong Kong, is at an extreme low for many of Hong Kong's citizens. When the virus issue became a public health threat, Hong Kong officials struggled to direct people to keep order. As the first known case of the disease showed up in the city around January 22nd, it would be on the 25th the city declared the outbreak an emergency, the highest warning tier for the city. Healthcare workers threatened to protest if all the points of entry into the city were not closed, fearing similar workplace dangers they faced back in 2003, as well as not being sure they had enough staff to manage a massive outbreak otherwise. But the symbolism of closing off the city from the mainland, because this was happening during the same time the protests were, seemed to cause hesitation amongst the Hong Kong officials. Starting around this time, rumors over shortages of supply and limits on imports were starting to spread around and become popular, being fed by the fear and distrust of the narrative being put forward by officials that everything was under control. Masks were already in short supply due to a combination of people stocking up on them for the disease and the city's attempts to deter people from using them to hide their identity during the protests. But a real shortage of some items made the possibility of shortages of other items feel all the more likely. And this is when everything started happening quite quickly. January 28, Hong Kong officials announced that there will be a closure of half the city's points of entry, and with fewer flights being directed between Hong Kong and the mainland to be enacted on the 30th. Not seeing it as enough, on February 3rd, thousands of medical personnel would start protesting for the closure of all the city's points of entry. City officials would soon announce the closure of all but 2 points of entry and the airport for that night. People had already started buying items in bulk, patiently waiting in line over the past few days. But it would be on February 3rd, with the announcement of entry points closing, that the rumors started drawing a lot of attention to themselves and clearly influencing people's purchasing. Then, on the 4th, the first known death due to the disease would be confirmed. The announcement of a mandatory 2-week quarantine for anybody coming into and back into the city would be established. All of this while numerous factories on mainland China were still shut down. Everything up to this point had been building only to create a massive tidal wave of panic buying, making Black Friday shopping look tame. The fear was that Hong Kong was soon going to be unable to import key items, if much of anything at all. This became a real possibility in the minds of people living in politically unstable Hong Kong. And due to that kind of fear, any item that seemed to be at risk of being in low supply was highly sought after, creating an almost self-fulfilling prophecy-like effect. And here, toilet paper would take center stage. It became the focus of viral photos, videos, and news articles that highlighted the crazed mass panic for buying toilet paper in Hong Kong, which became international news, which is very important, because so did the idea that there might be a problem with importing and acquiring toilet paper. Here we have a claim that it's for employees' eyes only. Ooh, insider information. It states that the large local Hong Kong supermarket chain, Welcome, was soon going to be out of items like ramen, drink brands, rice brands, etc., and notably, most brands of toilet paper. This other post also covers a rumor that in 2 weeks, mainland China won't have any toilet paper for Hong Kong to import. The hotels are already purchasing it in a rush. The people outside just don't know yet. Buying toilet paper or not? It's up to you. This once again claims to be insider information from a person within Welcome. It was rumors like these, allegedly secret insider leaks, that drew a lot of extra attention to themselves and notably toilet paper, and in a way a bit reminiscent of the guerrilla media found on the mainland. In the end, it didn't have to be true. I suppose there is a possibility that there was somebody with inside the store who maybe leaked some information but probably didn't understand the totality of what was actually going on. But the end result, the final rumors that were spread around the city, that just had to be believable to some to create the panic snowball effect that we all saw. The claims of a shortage and import restrictions were and have been denied by many large brands. Vinda, which supplies up to 37% of Hong Kong's consumer toilet paper, they addressed that the virus caused resupplyment delays due to roadblocks between the ports and the factories. But overall production of toilet paper would not be too greatly impacted. Major store brands like Welcome, but also Park & Shop, they made it clear that they were working very close with suppliers, and that imports were still going to be coming into the city. Given that all of this happened during the holiday of Lunar New Year in China, which was extended by the CCP in order to keep people home during the pandemic, many workers were on extended vacations, which did slow down resupplying. But due to Lunar New Year, companies like Vinda also stockpiled on 3 to 4 months of raw resources to produce toilet paper in case there were any disruptions, which did end up helping a lot due to all of this. They only faced a max 2-week delay at certain factories to start producing toilet paper again, and that delay had already started back in late January by this point. The problem ended up not being cut off from imports, but a struggle to keep all the stores in Hong Kong evenly supplied with toilet paper. Some stores were being hit and constantly hit harder than others. Companies would spend at least 2 weeks steadily bringing over toilet paper from Guangdong just to meet the demand in Hong Kong, during which there was a case of armed robbery where a few men would actually steal up to 600 rolls of toilet paper as they were just being delivered at one of the stores. They were caught and much of the toilet paper was recovered, but it also became an international news story too. In the end, it was the fear that the island city of Hong Kong was going to be cut off from imports from mainland China, conditioned by the 2003 SARS experience, political unrest, entry points closing, and other real shortages like that of face masks that made the rumors seem all the more believable. Rumors that emphasized toilet paper shortages. You gotta get your toilet paper. People would panic buy items listed in the rumors, and the visible shock of seeing people try to get said items in person, on social media, or the news made matters worse. Stores did all they could to just keep restocking their supplies, and again, Hong Kong was never actually cut off from imports of rumored items. But the panic made it all feel like it was true. The items not being there made it feel like it was true to many people. These events would intertwine toilet paper with the virus. It became perceived as an item you would absolutely need to prepare for the pandemic, because you couldn't be quite sure you'd be able to get your hands on enough. Now, that's a neat little story, but how did this go on to become a global problem? China is only responsible for 12% of the global export toilet paper market, which is the largest of any single nation, but pretty modest overall. In short, it's people from other nations seeing what people are concerned for without knowing the complications behind why they are concerned for it in the first place. And as you get further away from the original source of that fear, it's hard to understand why people are even afraid in the first place. Look at how long it took me to explain all of this. The average person probably isn't going to do this sort of research on their own. So with all of that, who was next? The panic for toilet paper would next hit the small island nation of Singapore just a few days after Hong Kong. On February 7th at 5:30 p.m., the city would move up its outbreak alert system, DORSCON, to code orange. This as 3 new infected people were found in the nation, and the message would be sent to just about everybody's cell phone. Singapore leadership would be quick to address that there were no shortages in supplies, and specifically noting items like toilet paper, which was apparently ignored by many, and if anything just kept bringing more attention to toilet paper. With the memory of SARS still fresh, reaching code orange just like back then, and with Hong Kong full of people panic buying toilet paper still going on at this point, many people in Singapore were caught up with the ideas of toilet paper import shortages, and would flock to stores and supermarkets for it, among other items. Singapore is heavily dependent on imports. It's a very small island nation with a very large population. As the most concerned individuals got to the stores that night of the phone alert, they made bulk purchases. As less worried and/or people who were busy started showing up later on, they were shocked by panic buying clearing out so much of the shelves, and it often made later waves of panic buying, and this was making international news as well. Around the same time, rumors in Taiwan around February 7th would spread far and wide that because toilet paper and face masks were made of the same materials, that it was inevitable that there would be shortages of both due to the fact that people have been buying so many face masks over the past few weeks. The government had to immediately start making public statements that this is not true, and would go as far as to find the 3 women who started the rumors and press charges against them. Taiwan produces a significant amount of its own toilet paper from wood imported from South America and Canada. But the panic nearby fed into the panic in Taiwan. But there's more to it. Taiwan actually faced a toilet paper shortage back in 2018. This was brought upon by an announcement that toilet paper prices were going to be increasing from 10 to 30%. So people went out and started panic buying this stuff to buy as much as they could before the increase. In this case, there was a real disturbance to imports due to forest fires, ultimately limiting the available wood pulp. The 2020 case though, there was no shortage of wood pulp. But it's not surprising that such an influential rumor would call back to the notion of there being a limited availability to wood pulp. It is something that many people in Taiwan experienced only recently and were extra sensitive to stories covering it. And with that said, many people started calling the 2020 toilet paper incident the toilet paper crisis 2.0. Next up, we have the interesting case of Italy, which would have people flocking to stores throughout Lombardy starting around February 23rd. This after the government implemented emergency lockdown measures in key communities. There was in fact panic shopping here, and it hit an even larger international audience due to the fact that this is one of the first major outbreaks outside of Asia. But what was notable is how little attention was drawn towards toilet paper in all of the news articles reporting on the situation. I couldn't find any, and I don't know if there are, at least in English. People were buying toilet paper, you could see it in the photos, but the reports mostly talked about food and stores just being drained from supplies in general. Why? Northern Italy wasn't impacted by the fears in East Asia. They weren't mainstream yet. The outcome here is likely a combination of people not knowing much about the toilet paper crisis elsewhere, Italy being home to a world-leading consumer toilet paper manufacturer, the Sofidel Group. They literally helped host Tissue World 2019. A 3-day international conference about everything paper and tissue paper in Milan, the capital of Lombardy. In general, there just wasn't a fear of imports being cut off being a very big part of the culture there, let alone being cut off from toilet paper itself. At least not in Italy's most industrial region, Lombardy. Moving on, there were individuals all over the world that were stockpiling up on toilet paper. There are tons of tweets about it all throughout February, but things really escalated on February 26. This is when Hawaii would start having large groups of people panic buying toilet paper. The early start of it becoming a widespread, truly global panic. Why is Hawaii such a big deal? Well, basically, Hawaiians go for toilet paper the second they get spooked. It's like a security blanket for them or something. The psychological effects of experiencing an actual shortage can influence a person's behavior, probably for the rest of their life, but also sometimes a whole culture for a generation or so. This is where Hawaii's backstory comes into play. The cost of living in Hawaii is higher than most places in the US. This is in part due to limited space, but also because almost everything needs to be imported from afar. In July of 1971, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union would go on strike, and it would not fully end until February of 1972, shutting down practically all US West Coast ports. The crisis would reshape the culture on the islands. There was a shortage of many items, but none as iconic as toilet paper. It arguably became a status symbol. Some businesses had to have cucky managers, people who handed out and/or monitored how much toilet paper was being used in bathrooms. Radio stations were using toilet paper as gift prizes, and neighbors would give it away as housewarming gifts. Months of toilet paper shortages would leave a lasting impact. But then it happened again. This time, nationwide. In 1973, the American recession and fuel shortage led to a nationwide toilet paper shortage after Congressman Harold Froelich kept making overblown press releases about the potential that it was soon not going to be available. No one cared at first. For the most part, there were shortages of many things. That was until talk show host Jimmy Carson poked fun of the story in front of his 20 million viewers.
Toilet paper.
Everybody freaked out. Maine to Hawaii again, who was like, no, we just got it back. This shortage would hit the nation for 4 months. Hawaii would go on to have at least 2 more toilet paper crises due to fears that dock workers were gonna go on strike again, limiting their imports, back in October 1999 and October 2002. So, when on February 26th, the Hawaiian Department of Health released a statement via an update that citizens on the islands should prepare a survival kit similar to those that they would have during a hurricane, soon America's busiest Costco in Honolulu, Hawaii, would make national and international news as people were, wait for it,
around lunchtime the shelves for toilet paper were empty,
buying a lot of toilet paper, among other goods. And it's worth addressing, there were no known cases of the disease in Hawaii yet. Soon after Hawaii, all these stories about people panic buying toilet paper started to accumulate and draw attention to each other as the pandemic started to become a bigger issue in other nations. Around February 27th and 8th, Japan and Australia would join in, due to the incorrect notion that they too import most of their toilet paper, both of whom produce most of their toilet paper domestically. Both nations are quite dependent on imports, and it was easy for a lot of people within these nations to get caught up into this panic because they saw a lot of people panicking elsewhere. And with them, and all the people who came before them, this idea of toilet paper shortages would go on to become a massive global phenomenon. It was not long before other nations and their own local news stations started picking up on the fact that their own people were panic buying toilet paper as well. From Canada to Brazil, Chile to Germany, Sweden to South Africa, the UK to the rest of the US. Not the Arab world though again, they got lotas. France to Russia, the list goes on. Basically the whole month of March was Toilet Paper Hunger Games edition. The panic would hit the community I'm from around March 12th, later than most parts of the nation, but still quite dramatic, especially given that I'm from Maine, a state that is around 90% covered with trees and has many toilet paper manufacturers. In conclusion, island communities and their own insecurities when it came to acquiring imports would condition them prioritizing key items for a number of complex reasons. Toilet paper would take center stage, drawing international attention, as later communities, islands or not, prepared for the oncoming pandemic, bulking up on supplies. Many were influenced by the specific items island communities had purchased, often with the belief that they too would share in their challenges acquiring items, like toilet paper for instance, especially after Hawaii. It's panic that had maybe some logical, reasonable basis for happening in certain areas that would slowly spread to communities where it just made less and less sense. But they were just focusing on what people were freaking out about and not necessarily why. It only took a few to panic for it to spread to others. And in the end, this toilet paper situation arguably went more viral than the virus itself. And that is the end of the video. My question for all of you is, how were you impacted by the 2020 toilet paper fiasco, panic buying shortage, whatever you want to call it? I wasn't really impacted all that much, to be honest. I fortunately had a big thing of toilet paper before all this happened, so I was good to go. But I think there might be a good argument in the future for people to invest in a bidet. And with all that said and done, my name's Dale, this is Think Fact, and remember, never stop learning. Thank you for watching.